Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am honored to be visiting today with Dr. Howard Schubiner. Dr. Schubiner is the director of the Mindbody Medicine Center in Michigan. He has also published over 100 scientific articles, along with two incredible books, Unlearn Your Pain, see there, and Unlearn Your Anxiety and Depression. And Unlearn Your Pain is a book that I tell everyone that's suffering from long COVID to read. It is brilliant, it is insightful, and you can hear your compassion and intelligent and sensible tone throughout the whole book. And I know that it has helped so many people, and I'm so excited to have you here today, Dr. Schubiner, to talk more about your book and other insights. So welcome.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. You forgot to mention it's very heavy. It's very big and heavy. So
It is a big book, but that's
some people are there. This is too big. This is way too big.
It is, but it's because it's just full of so much good stuff. So the first question I have for you, which I'm gonna guess is probably a question you're asked the most, and that's probably because it's the most misunderstood. Can you explain a little bit or a lot of it about mind-body syndrome and the neuroscience behind that, please?
Yeah, I really think this is so important. And medicine, modern medicine does not really understand the neuroscience of pain, doesn't really understand the neuroscience of how the brain works. Medicine understands if you have a stroke, there's a certain part of the brain that dies and a certain part of the body that's affected by that. But how the brain actually works on a moment by moment basis is predictive processing,
Mhm.
which means that our brains literally create what we experience.
Mm.
And this is not some kind of woo-woo, new agey kind of idea. It doesn't mean that if we think we're going to be rich, we'll become rich. What it means is that we don't see with our eyes.
Mm.
It means that light comes in our eyes, but our brains, the visual cortex part of the brain, creates the images that we see,
Mhm.
which is why sometimes your brain will see things that aren't there, or missee things, or will see things from one eye but not the other eye. We'll see optical illusions, and why your brain can see when we sleep because we're dreaming.
Mhm.
And our brains, we don't hear with our ears. Sound comes in our ears, but our brain creates our hearing of what we actually hear. And most importantly, we don't feel with our body.
Mm.
This is the weirdest thing to understand. So weird. But it's true. When you touch a hot stove, it's not your finger causing pain.
Mhm.
It's actually the brain. And we know that because many, many people, this has been recorded for many years, can have an injury and not have any pain.
Mhm.
So it's not the injury. The injury sends nerve signals through the spinal cord to the brain, and the brain literally makes a decision whether to activate pain or not. Usually, when there's an injury, your brain makes a decision to activate pain, which is good.
Mhm.
It's necessary because we need to know if we're injured.
Mhm.
Um, but the research also shows that stress and emotional distress activates the exact same part of the brain as does a physical injury.
Mhm.
And this is mind blowing.
Mhm.
Now, why did God do that? Or how did we evolve that that happened? And no one really knows. There's speculation about it, but it's true. And many studies have shown this using, functional MRI of the brain, that stress and emotional distress activates parts of the brain that are just the same as pain. So when stress causes pain, which it frequently does, and it happened to me many times, or when stress causes fatigue, or when stress causes brain fog, or when stress causes headache, or urinary frequency, or burning pain, or
Mm.
numbness and tingling, all the different things the brain can create. when stress causes that, it's real.
Mhm.
It's not imaginary. It's not fake. It's really happening. And it's happening in the sensation is the same as if someone also, did have a structural or physical injury. That's how the brain works
Okay.
in a nutshell. And I teach all my patients this. My patients know way more about predictive processing and neuroscience than most doctors do.
Well, and it's so fascinating because with long COVID, people are experiencing a lot of symptoms, but to understand that you said something one time that just stuck with me, that pain means danger, not damage. And I think that when people can wrap their minds around that and recognize that the brain might be just sending a signal that's not maybe entirely correct, is that accurate to say?
Right. Well, the brain detects threat. We have a very, very sensitive and strong reaction and detection system for threat.
Mhm,
If you think about our forebears, you're in the forest
mhm,
or the savannah and you hear rustling in the bush.
mhm,
Is it a tiger or is it the wind?
mhm,
Well, you can stick around and find out,
mhm.
but that might be dangerous because it might be a tiger.
Right,
And
right.
so our danger system is there to hear rustling of the leaves and move and jump or look or take cover or do something to protect ourselves. It's like a smoke alarm,
Mhm,
and it's set in a way to be, you know, to be sensitive.
mm,
If you're driving down the highway and you see a car all of a sudden veer toward you, you immediately go into
mhm,
a danger mode and you immediately take action, but you turn your car, you tense up. This
mhm,
is an automatic thing. And our
mhm,
brains are looking out for danger all the time.
mhm,
And many of the dangers in the modern world are emotional dangers. Many of the dangers are what our relationships are like, how people treat us, how what's happening at work, what's happening in the world, what's happening politically, what's happening,
mhm.
you know, when a pandemic comes, the danger signal is triggered in the whole world,
In the whole world.
all at the same time.
Right.
And it's a very powerful reaction. It's a very real reaction. And it's, and therefore it only makes sense when there's threat or danger that our brains would alert us.
Mhm,
Your brain can't tap you on the shoulder. If you have a parent who's suddenly sick and maybe dying, or you have a child who you're worried about in school, or you're worried about what some of their behaviors, or your neighbor is threatening you, or your boss is micromanaging you. All these normal kinds of stresses, your brain can't tap you on the shoulder and speak. My dear, my sweetheart. There's a lot going on. You really need to deal with it.
mhm,
But you know what the brain does? It gives you a headache or a stomach ache, or it
mhm,
makes you so tired you can't get up and out of bed to go to work. It's
mhm,
trying to protect you, it's trying to alert you, it's trying to help you. That's how the brain works.
mhm,
And it's up to us to interpret the messages and understand and distinguish between, does my stomach hurt because I have an ulcer, or is my stomach hurting because um, my 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 sister and I are having a major conflict?
mhm, mhm,
That's the question we have to answer. But if you don't ask that question, and most people don't ask that question, most doctors don't ask that question.
mhm,
They just assume because there's a symptom in the body, there must be some damage in the body. And that may be true.
mhm,
But most people with chronic pain, chronic fatigue, chronic brain fog, if there's something medically wrong, when you get a regular routine checkup, you would find it.
mhm, mhm,
And most people with these conditions do not have a structural problem in their body. And again, this is a mind blowing and revolutionary concept that you know, not everybody sees or want, or can really grab their arms around, because it's so counterintuitive in some ways.
It's counterintuitive, but the science shows it. It's proven how our bodies react in fight or flight, and that we can get stuck in these patterns, but we can retrain the brain, which is what your book shows people how they can do, methods to interrupt that patterning and meet whatever biopsychosocial issues or factors are playing in, whether it's predictive coding or social contagion or past traumas, that we can remedy that, right?
Right, exactly. And it's all of those things that you mentioned. You put that really well. It's all of those things mixed in together. And this isn't, my say so. We have randomized controlled studies to show that these methods do work and they are effective, and they are more effective than the standard kind of coping mechanisms that most people are given. If you go to the top medical centers in the country, and these are smart people, smart doctors, caring doctors, good doctors, but their teaching and their training is that if you have chronic problems like this, their message to people is, well, it's probably not going to get better. We'll try to help you cope with it as best we can. We don't know exactly what is wrong, but we're here to help. And we
Right.
care about you.
Yeah.
And so the caring is the same. You have to care for people.
Mhm.
It's critical that people understand that the symptoms they have, the sensations that are going on in their body, are real. They're not imaginary. They're
Mhm.
not their fault.
Mhm.
They're not because they're crazy. They're not because they're weak.
Mhm.
It's not because they want them. It's because the brain is creating them.
Right.
And if they've had medical testing and there's no objective and clear and obvious medical reason for it,
Mhm.
then we can say, oh, we know what's going on. It's not that we don't know. We do know what's going
Mhm.
on. And we have methods for proving this. We have testing methods that are very simple and very powerful for helping people see that that their brain is actually doing this. And once they can see that, if they can understand it, if they
Mhm.
can get it, if they can then they can begin to rewire these neural circuits that are causing the sensations, and if necessary, to deal with the emotional situations that might be underlying it. And not everybody has to do trauma work or emotional work. That's certainly not necessary. You have Paul Garner on your show. I spoke with him the other day about this. He got better, relatively rapidly from long COVID, a severe case from what I could tell. And, he didn't do emotional work or trauma work or anything like that. Um, but he did, when I spoke to him, he said, it was really interesting because when I was in the midst of it, my symptoms had a fair amount of variation.
Mhm.
There
Mhm.
were some days when I was actually a little bit better, some days when I was a little bit worse, some days it would go really, really bad. And for no apparent reason, it seemed random. And then when I explained to him, well, that's because your brain, the neural circuits in your brain are making it better or worse. It has like it has dials that ramp up or ramp down the symptoms. And based on threat, based on danger, based on, all sorts of stuff that's in the subconscious part of the brain. And he said, wow, that's amazing. I wish I would have known that at the time. It was
Uh,
funny. It was great.
well, everything you're saying makes such good sense to me, and you describe it so perfectly here with me and in your book. Like, man, if people get the book and just read even just the first 4 chapters, which they should read the whole thing, but the first 4 chapters just explain it so beautifully. And to me, it's such good news. We can do something about this. We are not condemned to this long COVID. In fact, you had there was somebody that recently read your book. She reached out to you, and I know then to me too, that had
Yeah.
been dealing with just multiple symptoms. Her doctors had told her to anticipate a very long recovery. She read your book, and from being in a walker, 2 weeks later was running 3 to 4 miles 3 times a week. I mean, that's remarkable. I mean, that is, I mean, that just goes to show. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about what somebody would expect when they get your book? Like, what steps should they look forward to?
Yeah, this person emailed me about this, and I connected her to you. I was in the gym this morning, and there's a nurse there who had a tote bag, and the tote bag said, "Science is magic that works." And I just thought that was, so what does that mean? Where she says, well, when it's science, it's repeatable, you know,
Yeah.
it actually works. But it seems magical. I mean, that's the thing. It seems like magic for her that she could go from being so disabled to so well in such a short time. But it proves the point that neural circuits can change, and they do change.
Mhm.
And when people, like I said before, people are frequently getting better and worse within a short time, this rapid changes, that's showing that these are neural circuits.
Mhm.
When people are having symptoms that are triggered by minimal exercise, that's the danger signal in the brain being fearful. It's interpreting minimal exercise as threat. And it's
Mhm.
hard for people to get that because people say, well, my body must be so messed up that even minimal exercise I can't handle.
Mhm.
But that's not actually true. And I talked to Paul Garner about that, and he was saying, yeah, I went down this, when I was so sick, I went down this rabbit hole that my body was so damaged and broken.
Mhm.
Um, but it's not damaged and broken. It's based, they're just saying because the symptoms are so severe, it must be so damaged and broken.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the symptoms can be severe. They can be incredibly disabling, like this woman you were just talking about. When symptoms are triggered by stress, when symptoms are triggered by the weather, when symptoms are triggered by light or sound or heat
Mhm.
or cold or the
Mhm.
wind. These are great clues
Mhm.
because our brain is telling us, look, it's me. Hello, I'm doing this. But we have to know how to look for it. And
Mhm.
so this person we're talking about, she didn't go into psychotherapy. She didn't go into emotional trauma. I don't think very much. She just learned the most important thing was that she got the sense that she wasn't damaged and she wasn't broken, that
Mhm.
the real sensations she were having were not dangerous. Like you said earlier,
Mhm.
they're
Mhm.
not due to damage. And then she could begin to separate from those sensations
Mhm.
and begin to challenge them a little bit and begin to start telling herself that she's okay. It's the
Mhm.
silliest thing. It's
Mhm.
the silliest thing to have to talk to yourself. But the fact is that the people, if you think you're not talking to yourself, you're the one who's crazy because everyone is talking to themselves all the time. They may not be doing it out loud,
Right.
but we're giving ourselves messages all the time. And if we're continuing to give ourselves messages of I'm broken, I'm lost, I'm
Mhm.
hopeless,
Mhm.
there's nothing I can do, it's all my fault, what's wrong with me, uh, why does it happen to me and not other people? All those are messages that are actually reinforcing the danger signal in the brain,
Mhm.
reinforcing the idea of being under threat.
Mhm.
And so when we start consciously changing those messages
Mhm.
to I'm healthy,
Mhm.
I'm okay,
Mhm.
I'll get better, I'm safe, I'm not I'm not afraid.
Mhm.
Those are can be incredibly powerful messages, and we can help people begin, as like I write in the book, help people begin to give themselves those messages and then imagine walking.
Mhm.
Give yourself those messages and imagine walking because neurons that fire together wire together.
Right.
So when you're walking or doing certain kinds of exertion with fear and worry and doubt, that's teaching your brain that walking is dangerous. You're reinforcing the
Mhm.
fact that walking is dangerous. And most people with these kind of mind body syndromes get worse over time, not better over time.
because they're training those neural pathways because of the messaging they're giving themselves and from what they're hearing
Exactly.
from society online, or even
And
unfortunately
their own.
from their doctors that are saying, you're
Exactly.
sick, be careful, don't do that. So those
Exactly.
parallel neural pathways start to, as you said, fire together and bolster almost, unfortunately, more
Right.
symptoms.
Yeah. If you
Mhm.
have an insult, if you have an injury, it'll heal and then you'll get better. But if you have an injury, it will heal. But if you start getting worse, that's your brain. If you have a virus, it'll heal and you'll start getting better. If you have a virus and it heals and then you start getting worse, that's your brain.
Yeah.
This is, I mean, it's really amazingly simple, but powerful to think of it that way. And
Mhm.
I know there's controversial and a lot of people will disagree, etc., but that's what I believe is happening. But on the other hand, neurons that fire together wire together in the other way.
Mhm.
So when you start walking and you're giving yourself all these powerful and positive messages that I'm okay and I can do this and I can handle
Mhm.
it, and the sensations aren't going to bother me so much, and then you just do a little. You do a little more, you do a little more, you do a
Yeah.
little more. And it's kind of like pacing, but it's different than pacing
Mhm.
because pacing is, oh, if I feel bad, I'll stop.
Right.
This is different. This is setting a prescribed amount of activity. It might be 5 steps or 10 steps or a minute, whatever it is, start low, but it's doing it every day with these positive messages. And
Mhm.
some days will be better than others. Some days you'll say, boy, I felt okay doing those 10 steps. Now, the
Mhm.
next day, oh, I felt horrible doing these 10 steps.
Mhm.
So you don't go back to 2, you stick with 5, but you
Mhm.
keep doing it. And
Mhm.
your brain will learn because you're
Mhm.
teaching your brain like teaching a puppy, like
Mhm.
training a puppy with love and kindness and gentleness
Mhm.
and persistence and a consistent message. I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. It sounds so silly. It sounds so
Oh.
simple, but it's amazing how powerful it can be. And the proof is in the people that we see,
Mhm.
who do get better. And there's a small research study that's going to be published in the next few months showing the similar thing.
Mm. Yeah, I remember for me, it was pulling weeds in my garden. The first big weed I pulled, well, it was probably only, the roots were probably only 3 inches deep, but I yanked and sent me to bed. And the next
Yeah.
time, yank, and I felt the yank and I talked myself through it. And then I went for a little bigger weed. And over time, it, I showed myself that I could do
Yeah.
this and that I was safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I mean, the
amazing.
beauty of that is the hero of that story is you.
Mm-hmm. That we
I
have
mean,
the
that's the beauty of
influence.
it.
We
Yeah.
can do it, that it's in our hands, and it
Yeah.
is a really empowering
Yeah.
place to
And
be.
and some people benefit from seeing a mind body therapist. Some people benefit
Mm-hmm.
from doing emotional work. Some people have, unfortunately been traumatized in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've been traumatized in your life in childhood from parents or whoever, that trauma is remembered in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
The danger signal becomes more sensitized to later stress, later traumatic events. And
Mm-hmm.
when you have a series of traumatic events starting in childhood, teen years, young adult years, and then you have a car accident, or then you get COVID, or then you get,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or then you get another, serious, stressful life event, any of those things can trigger that danger signal to activate a whole array of sensations in the body as a message.
Mm-hmm. And you say the message. I've heard you say the pain is not the problem; it is the solution. And there's often an important message in that struggle. And so, how on
Yeah.
a deeper level can this be a great teacher for us?
Yeah. I mean, talk about counterintuitive. This
Mm,
is really counterintuitive
right?
that, I was at a meeting one time and a young man stood up. He said, in my culture, pain is viewed as a gift from God.
Mm,
And I thought about it for a minute and I said, well, if God made us and God made our brains and our brains can give us pain, And maybe it is a gift. Maybe there's a message there. Because there's something called post-traumatic stress disorder. So trauma can cause people to have serious adverse effects from it. But there's also something called post-traumatic growth. We can learn from the events and the problems that we go through. And even people with PTSD have learned a lot of stuff through their adverse experiences.
Mhm.
And if part of the issue when someone has long COVID is that they take care of everybody else and they never look out for their own self.
Mhm.
They put pressure on themselves all the time. They're perfectionistic, and they feel guilty if they don't do everything just right.
Mhm.
Um, they they feel like they're not good enough, that
Mhm.
they've never been good enough. They criticize themselves. These are traits that are commonly seen in people who've had stressful life events. They've learned that as coping skills,
Mhm.
but those coping skills can turn into powerful negative influences as they continue over and over and over
Mhm.
again. And if one of the side effects of learning this work is to be kinder to oneself, is to put less pressure on oneself,
Mhm.
is to stand up for oneself and sometimes say, no, I can't do that.
Mhm.
That's an amazing gift
And it
so we can
requires
grow.
digging deep, to look at those things. And I know in your book there are just amazing questions and guides to help people see those parts of themselves that they may be
Right.
just
And
blowing.
when you look at long COVID, the studies have shown that the the factors that tend to make long COVID more common or likely to occur in people when they get COVID are prior history of anxiety, prior history of depression, prior history of loneliness. And these are all threats that the
Mm,
brain is having. These are all things that have been produced in them because of other life events that have caused
mhm,
those things, which is part of that sensitization that we talked about.
mhm,
And there's one study that showed that people with traumatic childhoods
mhm,
more likely to get long COVID. Now, obviously, there's a lot of people with long COVID who didn't have traumatic childhoods. A lot of
right.
people with long COVID who didn't have anxiety and depression ahead of time. We
Mhm,
know that.
mhm,
I talked to Paul Garner about that. He didn't have anxiety or depression before he got long COVID.
hmm,
But when he
right.
looked at his life, he did see some things in his earlier life that might have been sensitizing to the danger signal in his brain that he was unaware of that could have any influence or impact.
Uh-huh.
And so again, it's an opportunity to use this as a springboard to understanding ourselves better,
Mhm,
to moving forward with our life, to
mhm,
recovery, to healing ourselves, and
mhm,
also becoming the person that we want and need to be.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so, and we know that, you know, it's hard to know exactly, but the antibody studies show that there's a lot of people who have the symptoms and the syndrome of long COVID who don't have antibodies to COVID. And maybe
mm,
they never even actually had COVID. And again, it's a bit controversial, but nevertheless, this is a large number of people. It's not just a
mhm,
few
mhm,
people.
mhm,
It's
mhm,
a large number of people. And in the French study, people who were thought they had COVID but had negative antibodies had higher rates of having long COVID than people who had positive antibodies for COVID. So when we kind of put all that together, and things are getting better. One of the interesting things is that I I I think it's important that we bring these ideas out into the world.
mhm,
These ideas will prevent, not only help people deal with long COVID, they will prevent long COVID.
mhm,
And the reason that is that, and this has been shown in throughout history, if you look at the history of mind-body disorders, there's a great book by Edward Shorter about that. And what happens is when a disorder is starts to being seen and recognized in the society as being kind of a mind-body disorder,
mhm,
or a psychological disorder, people have tremendous stigma against that.
Mhm.
I've had mind body syndrome many times in my life.
Mhm.
I have no stigma, When I get stressed, my stomach hurts. Yeah, of course it does. I'm human.
Mhm.
But if long COVID is starts to being seen as a mind body disorder, not as a severe mitochondrial disease or something like
Mhm.
that, it
Mhm.
will occur less often. The
Mm.
brain will tend to produce
Mm.
symptoms or syndromes that are scary. Like I remember I had a patient who said, "Well, why does my butt hurt when I'm riding my bike? Because I love riding my bike." And my answer is, your brain is trying to scare you. Alerting is scaring. Smoke alarms have to be loud. So if you're being alerted, you're being scared, so to speak. And that's the best way to get your attention, is by giving you pain when you do something you love. It'll scare the crap out of you, so to speak. And and so it's really interesting how the brain works.
Mhm.
Symptoms can be contagious.
Mhm.
Just a couple weeks ago, there was an article in the paper, and there's something called Tourette's syndrome, which is muscle tics. And children and teenagers get that, and they have these tics, and they're very disabling and very embarrassing and
Yeah.
horrible. Um, and so there's a bunch of kids with Tourette's syndrome who put videos of themselves having tics
Mhm.
on TikTok.
Mhm.
And as and millions of people, young people, I don't do TikTok, millions of young people watch these videos.
Mhm.
And not a dozen, not 100, but literally thousands of teenagers develop tics after watching those videos. They didn't get Tourette's syndrome, but the contagiousness of it somehow seeped into their brain, to seeing this. And people who are under stress and emotional distress at the time of watching a video like that,
Mhm.
it might happen.
Mhm.
Thousands of kids started having tics. It's
Mhm.
amazing, the power of the brain, that we don't really think about or understand.
Right. And that for me, I know when I got COVID, which was in 2020, the first wave, all I was hearing were terrifying stories.
Yeah,
And that's when I created Positively COVID, knowing I need to somehow help offset this negativity, that not just negativity, but just the sensationalizing of mm, how horrific this was. And granted, it was horrific for many, many people, but some of these symptoms, you can see how I just absorbed them. That
yeah,
predictive coding, as I
yeah.
came to learn, made complete sense. And I was just under a constant state of fight or flight. And I had
The
this
more you read, the more you read about the wide variety of symptoms that can occur, the more you're likely to get them.
right,
And
right.
that's why, as I was saying before, the virus has come, it's gone, and the symptoms start getting worse and worse and worse. That's because of this contagious effect, what's
Mhm.
called the nocebo effect, which is the opposite of the placebo effect.
Mhm.
It's because of this ongoing fear and threat and danger that's happening, and the neural circuits getting more and more activated. It's very predictable that would happen.
Mhm. Now, how do we know if a symptom is a protector of some actual danger, or a maladaptive response that we have sort of created because of information, or are they the same thing?
Well, the symptom feels the same. I mean, the symptom's the same, but the underlying cause is different. If you have, uh, you're having severe neurologic symptoms, you need a brain scan.
Yeah.
If you're having severe neurologic symptoms, you need somebody to look at you and test your
Mhm.
nerves and your muscles to make sure that they're normal
Mhm.
and that they're functioning okay. You may need some blood, you'll need some blood tests to rule out certain metabolic conditions. These
Mhm.
are standard workups that are done for folks. If someone's having stomach pain, somebody needs to, check their blood test. Somebody needs
Mhm.
to look in their stomach, make sure that it's okay. So
Mhm.
it's not to say we shouldn't have routine medical care. We should, but we should also understand that when the routine medical care shows no obvious illness, that we should think about this neural circuit. And then, as I said before, you can rule in a neural circuit problem by seeing its characteristics, how it shifts, changes. It might be inconsistent. Some days a certain trigger will cause it, other days not so much, triggered by innocuous stimuli. All these things, if you look closely, and this is all in my book and in our articles of all the clues to look for.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and sometimes they're just so obvious. If you're willing to look at it. I have a woman I met who was a doctor who had hand pain. The pain got worse and worse and worse. No one could figure out what it was due to. She couldn't type. She had to stop working. She had to stop practicing as a doctor. And one of the things she told me, she said, in the throes of all this, I was having this horrible pain. I went away for a week on vacation. The pain disappeared for a week.
Mm-hmm.
When I came back to work, it was back with a vengeance. And I said, did you tell anybody that? Did anybody hear that?
Yeah.
I mean, does anybody looking for those clues? That's what we can do when we understand that it's a possibility that the brain might be causing our sensations. It's
Okay.
a possibility. I'm not saying we should jump to the conclusion that it's always the brain and it's not damage. You have to investigate.
Right. Now, what if, so I understand it's important to rule out structural issues. Now, going down that path of a lot of testing, I know can exacerbate the fight or flight even more. And then the tests come back negative, which, ideally that's what you'd want. But some people I've talked to say, oh, well, something did show up on my test. I have small fiber neuropathy.
Mhm.
Is that, are there, do you still just need to sort of just explore the mind body piece even more? Because I think I could have, maybe they wouldn't have been tests, but they would have been, not like a blood test, but, oh, we did these tests on your skin, and yes, it looks like a type of neuropathy.
Yeah.
Well, then I do mind body work and it's gone. So how people that are stuck in that area, I know I'm talking with one woman right now she's like, but it showed up on a test. So which is
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. There are a lot of it, there's a lot of situations in medicine where the test doesn't necessarily mean that there's actually damage. The
Mm,
most common one is MRIs of the back. And
mhm,
so everyone should know that almost all people will have abnormal MRIs of the back, whether they have pain or not.
mhm, mhm,
I'm not talking about tumors or fractures or infections. I'm talking about bulging discs and degenerative discs. And so my neck has because I know I used to have neck pain, I don't now, but my neck has 3 large bulging discs pressing on nerves. MRIs are abnormal in normal people of their necks and backs.
mhm,
X-rays of knees and joints and hips and shoulders um, often show some amount of arthritis because as you age, we get some amount of abnormality on the X-ray.
mhm,
But the research shows that the correlation between having abnormalities of arthritis in these joints and having pain is a poor correlation. So a
mhm,
lot of people have these abnormalities without pain. That's why we're doing these other tests that I mentioned, inconsistency, triggered, etc. Small fiber neuropathy is one of those areas. People
mhm,
with small fiber neuropathy do not have damage to their nerves, and we know this because their sensation is normal, their reflexes are normal, and
mhm,
their muscle strength is normal.
mhm.
So the doctors are saying, oh, it must be a small fiber, so small that it's
Ah,
causing because you have the tingling and the burning sensations. The tingling and burning are real. But we also know that people who've had stress and trauma in their life, 60% of them have positive biopsies for small fiber neuropathy in the absence of actually having the symptoms of tingling or burning or numbness.
ah,
So it's very common to have a positive biopsy. People get so scared when they get a positive biopsy for small fiber neuropathy, but it's very common for people to have that biopsy, just like people having a degenerative disc or a bulging disc in their back. And the doctors are attributing the pain to that, to the
mm,
biopsy, the small fiber neuropathy, or the degenerative disc disorder. These are the same
Mm.
things.
And then they go down
So
that path of like
yes,
treating the MRI rather than treating the person, and they're
right.
treating the small fiber neuropathy, even though that isn't what is upstream, is the
Yeah.
brain signal sending, not actually. Huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And again, if you take the time and look closely and investigate for the sensations, do they shift? Do they move? Do they sometimes worsen one foot or the other? Do they
Mm-hmm.
sometimes go up the leg and sometimes down? Do they,
Mm-hmm.
can they be triggered by cold or walking or heat or the weather? You're looking at all these things. And when you look at all those things, they don't all the clues are not going to be positive to rule in a mind body or a neural circuit type disorder, but some of them usually are. And when you can find them, then you can take a deep breath
Mm-hmm.
and relax and they say, well, you know what, it doesn't matter what the biopsy showed. A lot of people have these positive biopsies. It doesn't matter what the MRI shows. A lot of these people have these mild abnormalities on the MRI. What matters is what's my truth.
And what I believe. And I think having this evidence, from you, from these other stories, when people can actually believe that that could be the case, then they're often running,
Exactly.
recovering. Now, let's see, one other thing, couple other things I want to get to before I know I have to let you go. One thing I loved that you had in your book was, another way to leave pain behind is to focus on positive things in your life and connect your brain and its neural pathways to them. The more you do that, the more you are training your brain to activate positive pathways. So I'm hoping, and people should know, that you can find your book on unlearnyourpain.com, on my website, but until they'll order the book, it's going to be a few days. What would be what they can do right now to start this path, and with positive thinking and exposing themselves to the positive inner dialogue?
Well, the thing is, and you mentioned the belief, because it's really about confidence, and it's not a good idea to lie to yourself.
Hmm.
To say, "Oh yeah, I'm fine," but you don't believe it.
Right.
That's not going to work. That's not going to be helpful.
Mm.
To say, "Yeah, everything will be fine," but you dread, dread, dread.
Mm.
um, it really comes down. The first point is, like I say, taking the step of investigating and assessing and getting the evidence, and then knowing that and believing in the evidence, and then being confident. And then you can begin to tell yourself you're okay. You can begin to connect to the flowers that are coming out in the springtime, to connect to the weather when it's warmer, to connect to the breeze, to just allow yourself to be in a present moment and allow yourself to savor it,
Mm.
to
Mm.
savor the feeling and allow yourself to feel in your body that I can be okay. I can be okay right now, just for this moment.
Mm.
Maybe I don't feel so good. Maybe I feel brain foggy. Maybe I feel tired. Maybe my feet are tingling. Maybe I have a headache. But that's just temporary.
It is.
For the moment, if you can just begin to focus on your breath, let in sensations from the outside world, know that your body is actually working, focus on parts of your body that are fine, like, oh, my fingertips are really fine right now. Isn't that nice? I can feel them. It sounds silly, but you're just training your brain, because you have to train your brain, like I say, like training a puppy. The danger signal in the brain is like a child. And
Mhm.
you don't want to be angry with it. If a child
Mhm.
is lying in bed fearful of a monster in the closet, you don't want to be angry with them.
Mhm.
You want to open the closet door and say, look, there's no monster. And you
Yeah.
lie down with them and you give them love and caring. And then you read a story and then you
Mhm.
focus on the story. If
Mhm.
a kid skins their knee, if you get them to laugh, they're okay.
Right.
And if you can get yourself to laugh, you like laughing. If you
Mhm.
can get yourself to laugh, you can get your brain to laugh in spite of just not feeling so good. But
Mhm.
to focus, the more you focus on how bad you feel, that becomes a vicious cycle.
No, I love it. I love the way you put all of that. And I try to incorporate that into my meditations and the meditations I share. And I love the meditations that you have in your book too, that really help people come present with what is here and their direct experience. And speaking of laughing, I have this quote that I love. It is from Immanuel Kant, German philosopher from the 1700s. He wrote that laughter produces a quote, feeling of health through the furtherance of the vital bodily processes, the affection that moves the intestines and the diaphragms. In a word, the feeling of health that makes up the gratification felt by us, so that we can thus reach the body through the soul and use the latter as the physician of the former. And Norman Cousins said that it seems to him that a hearty laughter is a good way to jog internally without having to go outdoors. So that leads.
There's studies that show that laughter changes your genes.
Love it.
So, there's a whole field of epigenetics, which means that our genes are constantly turning on, turning off. Our genes actually change based on our environment.
Yeah.
The more stress, the more trauma, it's changing our genes. It's activating genes to produce sensations or anxiety or depression. But those gene changes are not permanent. And
Yeah.
those gene changes are still epigenetic, means they're still affected by our environment.
Mhm.
And there's a nice study that shows that laughter causes epigenetic changes in our genes. And so it's scientific now. It's not just our soul, it's not just our internal jog. It's actually the science
Right.
of of, of epigenetics.
Oh,
Um, so
thank you for
that's a good
that.
way to
Because
think
yeah,
about
that just, I mean, the more good information we have about that stuff, the more reason to do it, right? More reason to laugh.
it. Absolutely.
So now here's the time, and I know you have a great sense of humor. Will you internally jog with me for 25 to 30 seconds? We can
Okay, I would be happy to.
end this by laughing together. All right, let me get my timer ready. And we can just start by, warming up our smiling muscles, or whether it's a deep belly laugh or a little squeaky giggle, whatever you want to bring to it today. And
Okay,
everybody
I,
at home
think
watching,
of something funny.
yeah, think of it. I know you know some jokes, so you can think of that. Okay, on the count of three, we will laugh together. 1, 2, 3.
Oh, you're so silly. Oh.
Oh. Uh. And done. Oh, Dr. Schubiner, thank you so much
Okay,
for.
thanks for that jog.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you so much for being with me today and sharing so much amazing insight. And I know people are going to benefit so much from this, and I hope we can do it again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for doing what you do, Amy. It's very, very necessary in the world right now, and I really appreciate that you're doing that. And I send people to your website all the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll have a wonderful day, and everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.